back to the Witch of Lupin Hollow YouTube channel. I'm Tanae, the Witch of Lupin Hollow, and I'll be your host. So today we're continuing my series on what blank astrological sign means for you. And today in particular, we're exploring what Scorpio season means for you. Scorpio is one of my personal favorite signs. I have very strong Scorpio energy in my own chart, and quite a few of my closest relationships have a lot of Scorpio in their charts as well. So late October through late November is Scorpio season. This is when the nights are really starting to get longer, the days are feeling shorter and darker, we're really starting to get fall weather. And so this is sort of like the last bit of fall, this is the last harvest before we really come into winter. And Scorpio season corresponds with the pagan Sabbat of Samhain, or Halloween. Scorpio can be sort of grouped in with anything goth, anything witchy, anything that is remotely Halloween is usually considered an element of Scorpio. Because Scorpio is all about depth and mystery and intensity. We're gonna really dive into Scorpio today and what it means for you, and what it means for you that we're currently in Scorpio season, that the sun is in Scorpio. And so all of these energies, regardless of how they show up in your own chart, these energies are starting to show up for us. Scorpio in your own chart represents your inner witch. So Scorpio, yes, is a very intense sign. Yes, Scorpio is definitely associated with like eroticism and the occult, all sorts of taboos. Scorpio is not afraid to talk about sex or death or any of these topics that we as humans are sort of conditioned to be afraid of. Scorpio likes to uncover all of that. Scorpio likes to unveil secrets and really get into the shadow work. Scorpio is above all the shadow season. This is when we really do the shadow work. We really examine who we are internally. It's when we really start to pay attention to the changes that we need to see in our lives. And those are things that are going to come up whether or not you've been looking for them. So Scorpio season is sort of when secrets get unveiled, things get revealed, and that can sound scary, but really when you're doing it with intention, it's an incredibly powerful and incredibly spiritual time of the year. So Scorpio includes Samhain and Halloween, which is considered by most witches to be essentially the most magical day of the year. You'll often hear that on Samhain, the veil between worlds is thinnest, meaning that spirits, fairies, other entities like that can cross from their world into our world and walk among us. And so that's actually where the concept of Halloween, of dressing up for Halloween, of carving jack-o'-lanterns, all of these things come from this idea that the spirits can cross into our world at this time. And it's not even just limited to Samhain either, which is specifically Celtic in origin. You also see similar concepts in Mexico with Dia de los Muertos. So these are sort of almost universal concepts that this is a time of year when we're communing with the ancestors, we're really connecting with the spirit realm, and magic is more available to us, which is one of the reasons why Scorpio really points you to where you can find your inner witch. Because witchiness is not a universal concept. It's not something that is the same for everyone. There are certain connections between a lot of witches. A lot of us practice certain things or, share certain ideas. Pagan Sabbats are a great example that this is something that is founded in ancient traditions and ancient celebrations. They've been modernized. They've been changed so that we understand them. They were part of Wicca when Wicca was first founded, but then they became a popular common way for most witches to celebrate. And so, there's this cultural timeline of how these things come to be. And so although there are certain generalities that we can make about what it means to be a witch, your inner witch is very unique and very specific to you. So how do you find your inner witch in your chart? The inner witch can be found wherever Scorpio shows up in your chart, so whatever house and whatever planets you have in Scorpio. But also, and I think to a certain extent, for some people even more powerfully, certainly in my own chart, is the 8th house, which is ruled by Scorpio. The 8th house is where our relationships to taboos show up, and it's absolutely where you're going to find your inner witch. I find that most people who are on a witchcraft path have a strong placement of either Scorpio and or of the 8th house. You can also look at where Pluto and where the asteroid Lilith show up in your chart to understand your inner witch even a little bit deeper. We'll use my chart as an example. So I have a very strong 8th house. I have my moon, Venus, and Mercury all in Aries in the 8th house, as well as a number of asteroids. So I have a major stellium grouping of planets going on in the 8th house, and in particular, they're in Aries. So this means that my inner witch is very focused on the self. I'm very focused on self-development. That shadow work aspect of me really comes out in, like, I like to do self-reflection. I like to sort of examine my own thoughts and actions and motivations and understand where they're coming from. So that, like, depth of investigation and examination really comes out in the 8th house. So whatever sign you have in the 8th house, those are things that are going to come out for you. Of course, it's also influenced by what planets you have there. So, I have my moon in the 8th house, which is a very watery, flowy, intuitive energy. I also have, Mercury in the 8th house, which means I can sometimes be very penetrating in the way I communicate, to my detriment often. But that can really serve me as a witch because I do really sort of, Scorpio is definitely known for being very penetrating in that way, and I can really get to the heart of something without being afraid of it. Depending on what planets you have and what sign you have in the 8th house, that's going to give you some clues as to where your greatest power as a witch lies. It's going to give you some clues as to how you express yourself as a witch, right? And the same goes for whatever planets and house you have Pluto in. So Pluto is the planet that rules Scorpio. It's actually the modern planet that rules Scorpio. So before Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were discovered, astrologers had assigned the other planets to multiple signs. So, for example, Venus still rules 2 signs. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Mars was one of these, and Mars ruled Aries, which it's still considered to, and it also ruled Scorpio, which is really interesting for me personally because it means no matter what, my 8th house is also ruled by Mars. We still typically consider both the traditional and the modern planetary ruler of each sign, although for the most part, I think most of us look to the modern ruler because it gives us more insight. It's sort of more specific to that sign, but it's always interesting to look at the traditional ruler as well. So you could also look at where Mars shows up in your chart, but to me personally, I think Pluto is more effective for finding your inner witch because Pluto is the Roman version of the Greek god Hades. Pluto is the ruler of the underworld. Pluto is very much about shadow work. It's about spirit realm. It's about the myth of Persephone. Pluto has a lot to do with that, very deep inner investigative work of exploring your shadows. For me, and for anyone else born between, I think it's 1983 through 1995, anyone born in those years has Pluto in Scorpio. So Pluto moves very slowly, and so it's what we call a generational planet. Everyone within, often it's around 13-ish years or longer, has Pluto in the same sign. So it's not super specific to who you are very personally, but it does show you, especially when you can see what house Pluto shows up in, it gives you some insight, especially into your shadows and your inner witch. The Pluto in Scorpio generation, of which I am part of, is really the generation that's bringing witchcraft into the mainstream, because wherever Pluto shows up, that's sort of where that generation was unveiling secrets, where that generation was facing taboos. And because Pluto is at home in Scorpio, that energy is amplified a lot. And because it's Scorpio, the unveiling of secrets is about taboos themselves. Our generation is really unveiling taboos around sex, around gender, around death, and definitely around witchcraft and the occult. So we're really facing this head on. We're bringing it into the mainstream. We're saying, no, this is not something to be hidden. This is not something to be afraid of. This is something to explore and use as a tool to become better humans. My Pluto in Scorpio is a strong placement in and of itself. And I have my Pluto in Scorpio in the 3rd house. So that means that I like to communicate about it. I like to post videos on YouTube about the Pluto and Scorpio generation. I like to talk about witchcraft. I like to explore these taboos through communicating about them. And so I have a very strong witchy energy in my chart, which is no surprise. But I do find whenever I look at the charts of other witches, most people, and this doesn't mean that if you don't have this strong placement, you can't be a witch. Not at all. But I do find that a lot of people who consider themselves witches or who are interested in witchcraft have a strong Scorpio and or 8th house placement, because these are the areas where we really face taboos. We're not afraid to talk about these things. And even if you feel some of that fear, you have the potential within you to not be afraid of it, because your astrological birth chart is a map to your highest potential. It's a guide to the greatest things you could possibly achieve, which are always beyond your imagination, because there's always something greater, there's always something bigger, there's always another impact that you can have on the world. Your highest potential is limitless. And it's also a guide to the tools you need to achieve that potential. And discovering your inner witch, to me, is one of the most powerful ways you can achieve your potential, because it gives you this whole set of tools that so many people in the world are not using or are afraid to use because we've been conditioned to be afraid of them by society. Maybe this is the most Pluto and Scorpio rant I could go on, but the point is that exploring your inner witch, looking at where you have these placements in your own chart, is going to tell you so much about the power that you hold inside of you. So this is something that I help a lot of my clients with through various different coaching methods, private coaching, group coaching, memberships. I have all different sorts of things that I offer specifically around your inner witch, because it's such an important topic to me. And I think that when you can access your inner power just by being aware of it, you can achieve anything. So what does Scorpio season mean for you? It's all about finding your inner witch. And in order to do so, you're going to look at your astrological chart and you're going to see what sign and house do you have Pluto in, what house and planets do you have Scorpio in, what planets and sign do you have the 8th house in, and as a bonus, look up the asteroid Lilith and see what sign and house she shows up in. Lots of insight here. Make sure you drop a comment below and share what's coming up for you. Are you part of this Pluto and Scorpio generation? Where does Scorpio show up in your chart? What is your relationship with the taboos and occult and witchcraft topics of the 8th house? And, make sure that you follow my channel so you can be notified whenever I put out a new video. All right, I will see you next time, and happy Samhain.